Did you know that some of your favorite go-fast cars don't actually have their own special engine, but rather use existing engines from completely normal civilian cars that aren't fast at all? It sounds crazy, but it's true. So today we're going to look at a bunch of different cars that you didn't know shared the same engine. Let's get into it. And as a quick preface, not all of these cars share the exact same engine, but rather very similar engines. Often they're the exact same engine, but one has modifications for its specific application. Supercar companies come and go left and right, but there's one company that has survived and thrived despite all of this, and despite its ridiculously hard to spell and ridiculously hard to pronounce name, and that's Koenigsegg. But do you know what the American response is to Koenigsegg's absurdly fast cars? It's a police car. And more specifically, the most popular police vehicle ever used in the US and Canada, the Crown Vic. So what do Koenigsegg and cop cars have to do with each other? They're complete opposites. One of them makes 250 horsepower, the other one makes 650 horsepower. There's nothing these cars could share. Except the engine. That's right, it sounds a little bit crazy, but the Ford Crown Vic and various Koenigsegg vehicles all share the same engine, which is the Ford modular. Specifically for the Crown Vic, we're talking about the 2-valve 4.6-liter engine. If we were looking at something like the Koenigsegg CC8S, it is also a 4.6-liter Ford modular engine. You might be wondering why, and the answer to that is that the Ford modular is readily available with lots of parts available, and more importantly, the Ford modular family of engines responds amazingly well when forced induction is added, and more importantly, doesn't explode when modified to handle the power correctly. But to be fair, this is a little bit of a stretch because the Crown Vic has a 2-valve single overhead cam 4.6-liter Ford mod motor. The Koenigsegg has a 4-valve dual overhead cam 4.6-liter mod motor. So technically they're both Ford modular engines, but they're obviously quite a bit different, and one of them has a forced induction and makes like 600 horse compared to the Crown Vic's 250 horse, but regardless, it's the same engine. Moving from one supercar to another, let's take a look at something absolutely wild, and that's the Ultima GTR. Now this is a little known car company you may have not heard of, but it's an absolutely insane performance car from England. Some of the models of the Ultima GTR run a high 9-second quarter mile while also being able to pull insane cornering and braking Gs, thanks to the design of the body and the absolutely insane amount of aero that these cars have. Now this car is a bit of a cheat on this list because when you order an Ultima GTR from Ultima Sports, the company, they give you a couple of options for your motor, but that being said, one of the most popular options is a 7-liter GM LS7, which, as you might know, happens to also be the same architecture found in the Vortec engines, the LQ engines found in the Chevy Tahoe. That's right, losers, my daily driver has a supercar engine in it. As a side note, Ultima has appeared to have moved on to Gen 5 LT engines, and if you visit their website and look at the Ultima RS, for example, it's available with either a GM LT1, LT4, or LT5. The choice is yours. Now you and I know the Mercedes S-Class as the big luxurious vehicle that rich old guys buy when they realize that the Corvette is absolutely destroying their back and they need something a little bit more comfortable. And for the really rich guys, the 6-liter V12 was the only option when buying an S-Class. You get an S600 and just feel like an absolute baller. But that engine was not necessarily developed for big power. Sure, it makes a decent amount of power, but it's in a massive S-Class that weighs, 5,000–6,000 pounds, weighs as much as a truck. That being said, just because the engine itself wasn't necessarily designed with high performance in mind doesn't mean that it's not achievable, and this is where Pagani comes in. Now, they were the madmen that realized that this V12 would actually be perfect for their hypercars, their supercars, whatever you want to call them, the Pagani Zonda. But to be fair, the Mercedes M120 V12 engine was never a low performance engine. But as I mentioned, the applications it was used in by Mercedes simply weren't performance oriented in that kind of way. But along comes Pagani, and with the help of the Mercedes-AMG, they use 6-liter, 7-liter, and 7.3-liter versions of this engine in various Pagani Zonda models, with the most powerful variant producing 800 horsepower naturally aspirated. As a side note, hearing a straight pipe version of this engine, the Mercedes M120, in something like an old S-Class is absolutely hilarious because the sound does not at all match the body. There's no way this sound is coming from this thing, and it actually is. Kind of hilarious. You know that god-awful sound that VQ35s make anytime they start, rev, or do literally anything at all? Well, what if I told you you could get that same horrid sound while also hauling around your entire family? It sounds crazy, but it's true. The Renault Space and the Nissan 350Z share the same 3.5-liter V6 engine. Well, sort of. For those who don't know, Renault and Nissan have been together in business for quite some time, helping to design, develop, and build cars together. In the case of these two cars, the Nissan VQ35 and the Renault V4Y are very much the same engine. Now obviously there are small changes between the two, however they are internally identical and share the same architecture. As a side note, Renault uses the V4Y engine, which is basically just a VQ35DE, across an array of different cars, so it's not just the Espace that uses it. I think it's just the funniest application because it's a goofy looking minivan. And in terms of power, the Espace had quite a power decrease from 287 horsepower on the 350Z, that's for the DE models, ignoring the HR models because that's an entirely different engine, all the way down to 240 horsepower on the Renault Espace little van thing. Luckily, we don't have this little van here in the States because I can already imagine how annoying it would be with a straight pipe. Why? Why are you VQ35 guys like this? No one wants to hear it. Just stop. The thing sounds horrible and it makes 200 wheel horsepower and you're probably burning more oil than fuel. Just stop, please. And that takes us to Lotus Cars. You know, the little British car company. They're known for making small cars, lightweight cars, and they are basically the poster child for going lightweight rather than adding more power when building a supercar. And while they're absolutely amazing at building ultra lightweight sports cars, probably the best in the world, or at least the most known in the world, they're not particularly great at building engines. So who do they turn to? Mercedes, BMW, maybe TWR or a race company? Nope, they didn't turn to any of them for their engines. Rather, they went to Toyota. And it wasn't just a one-time thing either. Both the Elise and the Evora come equipped with Toyota engines. For the Elise, it's either the 1ZZ or the 2ZZ, both of which are 1.8-liter engines that you can find in the Corolla as well as various other Toyota applications. And the strangest application of them all for this engine? The Pontiac Vibe. That's right, this little turd of a hatchback has the same engine as a Lotus Elise and a Toyota Corolla. What a strange world we live in. For the Evora, they jumped up to the 2GR FE, which is a larger V6 engine, obviously because the Evora is a larger car, and they even supercharged it for the Evora S. On the Toyota side, this V6 engine is found in the Camry, the RAV4, and various other large sedans, minivans, and small SUVs. Now this next engine is particularly interesting, mostly for the sheer number of years that it was in production for, and that's the Buick 215 V8. This engine was born all the way back in 1961, and it wasn't just another small block engine from an American automaker, because this engine had something special, an aluminum block rather than an iron block. The applications for this engine include cars like the 1961 Buick Special, as well as a number of Oldsmobile and Pontiac applications. But this engine wasn't particularly interesting or powerful, and it had so many issues when it came to quality control with the block castings that it basically became financial suicide for Buick to continue producing this engine, so they killed it off in 1963. So what company would be crazy enough to use this horrifically unreliable engine that was so difficult to produce without quality control issues that it was put out of its pain after just 2 years of production? And that's Rover. This came after Rover bought the rights to produce the engine on their own. And since then, it has been used in Rovers, Land Rovers, Range Rovers, Morgans, TVRs, Triumphs, and more. Land Rover in particular used this engine all the way up until 2006, with the Land Rover Discovery 2 using a stroked out 4.6-liter version of this engine, which ironically still suffers from some of the block casting issues from the 1960s. And if you do some quick math on that, Land Rover used it until 2006 and it came into production at 1961. That gives it a production run of 45 years. Absolutely insane. This last engine here, I'm gonna say right now, it's a little bit of a stretch to put it on this list, and that's every single modern McLaren motor. Now, if you didn't know, all modern McLarens, from the P1, the 720S, the 570S, the 650S, all of them use the same V8 engine. Now, it has modifications for each different car because they all make a little bit different power, but it's all the same engine. So where does this engine come from, and what is it shared with? Well, the answer is actually kind of surprising, and that's Nissan. And more specifically, it's the Nissan VRH35L found in the R390 race car. Keep in mind, the R390 is technically a road car because Nissan did build a singular road legal model, but the rest of them fall under the scope of the R390 GT1 race car. Now, to be fair, Nissan did not completely develop this engine on their own. In fact, I'd bet that they actually didn't develop most of it. Rather, it was done by TWR, who was enlisted to help them design and develop the R390 when it was new. And after the R390 was long gone and dead, Nissan no longer needed this engine from TWR, so TWR just sold the rights over to McLaren for them to build for their road cars. Obviously, McLaren had to make some changes as needed, but considering they had to buy the rights to the engine, it's pretty obvious that all modern McLarens are using an engine heavily based on the VRH35L, which is an old Nissan racing engine. I gotta say, from powering the god-awful sound of the VQ35DE all the way up to powering literally every single modern McLaren, Nissan does a little bit of everything. That's all I've got for you guys today, and I want to give an honorary mention to the 2.3 liter engine used in the Mazda Speed 3, which then Ford rebranded as the EcoBoost to use in the Focus RS. And also as a side note, those Land Rover engines are absolutely terrible. Speaking from personal experience, I had one slip a cylinder liner. I misdiagnosed it as a head gasket, completely tore it apart, rebuilt it just to realize that the block was toast and the top end that I just rebuilt didn't need to be rebuilt at all. Remember folks, if you want to keep your sanity, never buy a British car. What other engines would you add to this list? Be sure to let me know down in the comments below. While you're down there, smash the thumbs up button if you enjoyed the video because it really helps me out. Get subscribed so you don't miss out on future videos. Check out some of the other stuff on the channel. Follow us on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. We post a lot on there too. And I'll see you guys in the next one.